State of Play now. Your State of Play panel this week, Mark Eichman is here. Joining him is Stephanie Hansen from the law firm of Young, Conaway, Stargate and Taylor. And Dave Baylor from NKS Distributors is here as well. Welcome, panel.
Thank you.
Who wants to talk about DelDOT? The Secretary of the Department of Transportation here in Delaware resigned last week. Was that a surprise for anyone?
It was a surprise to me because I know that the Governor Markell had not asked for her to resign. But I think it was the right thing to do. I think that it was, for her, a brave thing to do because she wasn't asked by the governor to resign. And in many ways, I think she was a good secretary. But clearly, public opinion and the number of very devastating issues have come to light that I think that it was the right thing for her to do.
I think it was a surprise, but I think in some respects it was a little bit overdue. The agency was just under a crossfire of different allegations, accusations, innuendos, and it seems to be still under a big cloud. And unfortunately, when you take that position or those types of position, when you're in charge, the governor's not going to resign. So you have to make that decision. Is it in the best interest of the governor and of the state to step down? And she did. And like Stephanie said, I applaud her for that. The question now is, where do we go? Where do we go from here?
The governor says he's actually looking for the replacement. The search is underway, and he's looking outside the state of Delaware. Is that something that needs to happen? I mean, can you find a replacement locally?
No. I think what's come to light in this state is that people appear to either be recycled or come up through the system to the point where those relationships that they've developed kind of interferes with their ability to really lead the organization. And here with DelDOT, which is such a complex and a multi-million-dollar agency, when you're trying to please elected officials, businessmen and developers, and those people have relationships with your boss, which is the governor, and your secondary bosses, which are the elected officials, you're in a lose-lose. So I think probably it's in the best interest of the state to step outside the state, have fresh eyes come in, and start to take control over an agency that seems to be there to try to please everyone and is not pleasing anyone.
Also, from a public perception perspective, having somebody come from outside gives kind of that separation, that it's not somebody who was involved in all these things that are being investigated now taking over, and it kind of gives the governor a chance to make a clean break and say, well, we've had all these problems and things are being investigated, but we're going to start a new day and move forward with somebody from outside the agency. So from that perception angle, I think it was a smart move to be looking outside of DelDOT and outside the state.
Would you be surprised if the governor does pick someone from Delaware?
I would be at this point because I tend to agree. This is one of the things where I think everybody around the table is on the same page, which doesn't always happen because so many of the problems are a result of past relationships and having entrenchment in the state. I think that it would not help public opinion if someone came from within the state to lead this. It would be something that they need to have, like Dave said, fresh eyes. But to make sure, here's a word of warning. Sometimes you get somebody new from outside of the state that brings in their own baggage that maybe wasn't looked at closely enough. And that happens quite a bit in these appointed positions. You bring in someone who is from, Oklahoma or Missouri or something, and you don't spend enough time really taking a look at, well, how did they do in their position there? Why do they really want to leave? What are they leaving? Are they leaving a mess behind? And that's something that I think that, sometimes we overestimate fresh eyes, but I think in this case, fresh eyes are necessary, but do the homework.
One of the key issues here is if some of these things that have come to light have come through the News Journal investigation, I think it's incumbent upon the governor to really get an independent commission to delve into DelDOT and find out if there are any other things in their closet that needs to come out. Because until you open those doors and expose everything, bringing in a new cabinet secretary, you're still going to be dealing with the same stuff. Is it going to slowly come out and always be constantly in the public eye?
Well, once someone does succeed, Carol Ann Wicks, what department-wide changes do you think this new person needs to make within DelDOT?
Well, number one, first and foremost, there seems to be, this is complex when you're talking about land, when you're talking about rights-of-ways, and I think there should be a group of attorneys, both state attorneys through the Attorney General's office and external attorneys assigned to DelDOT that has to put a legal stamp of approval on any transaction that's done. Because it's complex, the implications are so significant to taxpayers that, and it's clear that there were people in the agency that had that ultimate authority, but it doesn't appear that it was reviewed by legal experts that would have known that you run into some legal issues that we're now finding that they're running into.
I tend to agree with that. It was a surprise to me to find out that in an agency of 2,600 people, they've got 2 attorneys, one internal and then one external. And the external attorney's not been there, hasn't actually been doing DelDOT work for a really long time. So you have 2. The Department of Natural Resources, on the other hand, there's 400 and some folks that are there. And they have about a half a dozen different attorneys that work within the AG's office. So there needs to be more attorney review. There also needs to be more authority and oversight given to the Advanced Acquisition Committee. This is the committee that was put together to oversee these the rights-of-way purchase and reservation agreements. Well, that's kind of the question as to whether or not they had actually the authority to review and then give any approval, which they didn't have, on the reservation agreements. That's where the big problem is we have right now. Yeah. Those are my thoughts.
Some comments I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I agree with her. I mean, it really isn't that complex. It just seems like when you read and you drill down into the stories, none of the procedures were followed. And now DelDOT, through the secretary, and I have to blame her, and to a certain extent blame the governor, they don't want to open up the emails. And that goes against the transparency that the governor had talked about when he took over. If the emails suggest there were things wrong, put them out there. That's the only way you're going to move forward. But still, until that whole climate has changed, we're going to be spinning wheels of mud.
What do you think about suspending? I've heard some comments about suggesting that DelDOT suspend all projects for the time being until a successor is named.
Well, the sad reality of it is that they're almost going to have to do that because the Department of Transportation is in such sort of financial straits that, maybe that's not a terrible idea just based on the finances. Forget the investigations and replacements, but there's significant trouble financially for DelDOT.
An external review on each project is probably warranted. And look, if it passes the smell test, then it'll be fine.
So a lot more skeletons, you think, in DelDOT's closet, Dave?
Well, look, in a series of a few months, we have learned about Milford, we've learned about Sussex County, we've learned about Lewis. Those are just 3 projects that have come to light through a News Journal investigation. Now, we haven't talked about Newcastle County, the biggest county, and clearly the busiest when it comes to transportation. There's got to be other things out there that we haven't heard about.
All right, well, Carol Ann Wicks' last day is March 18th. Now we're going to switch subjects here. We're going to talk about Governor Russ Peterson. Passed away. Let's talk about his legacy in the state.
A very brave individual. It took a lot of courage for him to do a number of things that he did in office, and it cost him re-election.
Right.
When he first got into office, as we've all heard, he brought the National Guard, took the National Guard out of the city of Wilmington that had been placed in there. That was a brave move, but it was also something I think people expected. And so he was elected with people knowing that that's what he was going to do. With the Coastal Zone Act and having a strong environmental regulation of what you can and cannot build in the coastal zone, I think that's what eventually cost him his reelection, but what has turned out to be, of course, a very positive, good environmental statute.
I mean, he was ahead of the curve. The things that he was championing now are what everyone around the country is trying to push. And like Stephanie said, he paid the price. But now you look back on the legacy, he probably should have stayed here for a while, and we'd probably be a little farther in our environmental situation than we are.
Yeah, he was going green before it was even in vogue.
Right.
And if you look at the vote in the Coastal Zone Act in the General Assembly, one vote, it cleared the House, one vote, it cleared the Senate, and then he signed it into law. So really, he was the leadership, he really defined what it was to be a leader, and something he believed in, fought for, got it through narrowly, and it's stuck. Now here we are 30-some years later, and benefiting from what that's protected along Delaware's coastline. That you hear when they dedicated the education center at the Urban Wildlife Preserve that's named after him, and there's a big statue of him down there. I was there at the dedication in 2009, and it kind of turned into, he was there, a living tribute for Russ Peterson. You had then County Executive Coons, Governor Markell, Senator Carper, then Congressman Castle, all just praising him and saying how he really has been an inspiration to all four of those guys. And to have that impact on four very powerful leaders over Delaware's history the last 3 decades is a legacy in and of itself.
And it's something that you may not understand the magnitude of, but when he passed the Coastal Zone Act, that was 1971. That was before the Federal Clean Water Act. That was before the Federal CERCLA or Superfund Act. That was before the Toxic Substance Control Act. All of the major federal environmental laws that we use today, he passed the Coastal Zone Act before those. So, I mean, he really was very forward thinking.
Our thanks to the panel, Stephanie Hansen, Dave Baylor, and Mark Eichman.